Hey guys, Matt Jones in a town called Samcheok, which is on the east coast of Korea, up in the northern part of Korea. And you can see the name behind me there, Samcheok Station, which is the site of something which I believe is significant in the friendship between Australia and Korea. So let me explain why. Firstly, it's the 25th of January. So today is what I'm calling day 25 of 100 days to harvest. It's a journey to explore the story of friendship between Australia and Korea. And as I'm talking, you can see I'm looking around for something. I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for, but if I find it, you'll know. And it's the basis of this story. Back in 1950, on the 7th of July, this station here was the target of a mission from 77 Squadron, where they were coming to bomb in their mission targets of opportunity. 4 Meteor planes attacked this station. The reason they're attacking here is after North Korea invaded the south on the 25th of June 1950, and they pushed south. They then sent a column across on the east coast, down along between the mountain ranges, to basically secure this part of the country. And there was light resistance from the South Koreans, probably fighting quite a valiant fight, but just no match to the North Korean tanks. And so prior to the 7th of July, they'd captured Gangneung, which is the town just to the north of here, where I've come from earlier this evening. That's about 20 kilometres south of the 38th parallel, and so 38 is about 20 kilometres from North Korea. And this town here, Samcheok, is about an hour's drive south of Gangneung. And the North Koreans had secured this town as well, and so the 77 Squadron was told to do what they could to disrupt the movement of the North Koreans. And they thought they were tasked basically to attack the road or the train station and do what they could. And so they flew from Irakuni, where they were based in Japan, on the morning of the 7th of July, and they came across into South Korea to the south of this place here, and then they came up north on inland, and then swept across to approach the train station basically from the west, so that they wouldn't be coming head on into the North Koreans. And the first plane, or first 2 planes, attacked and released their rockets into the station with no effect. And then Squadron Leader Graham Strout dived in for his attack, the result of which was a massive explosion. And the cause of the explosion was he'd crashed his plane into the ground. Now, whether he had suffered a heart attack, or whether he had taken some shrapnel from the previous sortie that went in before him, or whether I don't think he was attacked by North Korean anti-aircraft fire, because there was no reports of that, or whether there was mechanical problems with his plane which resulted in him crashing, who knows. But 2 of the pilots thought that he might have had a faulty radio, because they'd lost communications with him and headed back independently to Japan. But the person he was teamed up with couldn't locate him, was concerned that the explosion might have been him crashing. And so the next day they did a patrol again over Samcheok, and they saw a great big white area of an area that had been incinerated, and that was clearly probably the remains of his plane. Someone did see him see the remains of the plane after the attack, and you know, there was almost zero chance of anyone surviving it. I've seen his gravestone down in Busan at the cemetery, and so I don't know how they went about recovering his remains, but it would have been a tremendous amount of heat. I think it's important in terms of the friendship between Australia and Korea, because we talk so much when we relate to the friendship and the events of the Korean War as an expression of our shared friendship, of the sacrifice made by Australia toward Korea. And quite often when we have the pageantry of remembering the Korean War, people talk about battles like Kapyong, Mariansang, to a lesser extent the Hook, and even to a lesser extent some of the other notable battles in the latter part of 1950 and during the trench phase of the latter part of the Korean War. And we talk about the casualties in a broad sense. We talk about a number of casualties who died and who were wounded at places like Kapyong. Rarely do we remember them by name unless there's a particular story that a politician's wanting to reel out, and he'll get the details and they'll be summarily recorded. But the reason I think it's important to come here to Samcheok is, as much as it's important to remember the sacrifice of the whole, and by that I mean not just that of Australia, but all lives that were lost during the conflict on the Korean Peninsula, I think that is mirrored by the sacrifice of individuals. And so I'm not saying we should become experts in the Korean War, or we should all stop to remember Graham Strout in particular, but I think it's an appropriate place to begin a commemoration. I mean, there is a really great tribute down in Busan, which does justice to those who fought from Australia. There's also a memorial in Seoul at the Yonsang War Memorial. But why not here too? Why not some appropriate memorial of sorts, without making it a problematic in terms of protocol because of what's in Busan and Seoul already, but something to indicate that Australia remembers the sacrifice of those who fought in Korea, and remember it down to the individuals because it's important. And by remembering our individuals, we're also saying to our Korean friends, many of whom have lost relatives whose names go unrecorded in their families, that we think their loss is just as important. Yesterday I spoke about Bomber Terry and the missing in action from Korea. And again, it might be seen that today's post here is critical, but it's not. It's saying, look, I think this is an opportunity to contribute to a betterment of our expression of what it means to have this shared friendship with Korea. It's food for thought. It's something I'll be pursuing, and I'll be letting you guys know how I get on during the year. But I don't think it's going to bear fruit immediately. So where Graham Strout actually sputtered in, I'm not quite sure. You can see I've walked about 300 metres now, and behind this wall is the train station, and you might hear the dull roar of the factories that are on the other side of there. I don't think it probably would have been close to the train station, but I don't think he necessarily would have hit the train station and I don't know what equipment from North Korea was here at the time, whether it were tanks, trains, people. That's not recorded. The information I go off is from a book I found in a secondhand bookstore. It's by George Ogders. It's called Across the Parallel, and it records the history of the 77 Squadron. He was at the time writing the history of the RAF during the Second World War when Korea broke out, and so he re-enlisted into the RAF, found himself in Korea writing a short history about 77 Squadron. He published the book in 1952, and I thought I'd read a short passage to end because it sort of gives a sense of what people were thinking at the time in terms of the Korean War. And he writes this: Squadron leader Graham Strout was the first Australian, indeed the first serviceman of the whole British Commonwealth to die in Korea. He had given his life for a principle that went far beyond narrow national interests. The men of the Australian Squadron were fighting and dying in this lonely corner of the earth to save the United Nations. They had been called on to fight one war because the League of Nations had failed. They were fighting and dying again in order that another international organisation should not also fail. I think that's really, they're important words because it doesn't make it a dramatic statement, but it does suggest why Australia thought it was important to be here in Korea. I think that to suggest there was a bonding of friendship between individual servicemen and the Koreans misses the point. Just as to talk about business as a specific expression of friendship from one person in a business to the customer in Korea also misses the point. But it's more that these are bonds, these are things that connect us, these are expressions on a strategic and national level of how really Australia comes together as friendships. And so in this series what I'm doing is really teasing out and painting a picture of what it means to have these friendships. I'm interested in your stories, actually, because they're the compelling proof of the friendship. They're your stories. They're not necessarily contentious or controversial. They might be seemingly ordinary, but together, when we bring them together, I think it'll be quite extraordinary. So, standing here around a place where a tragedy occurred, as we now embrace the story of friendship between Australia and Korea, would you consider sharing your story? I'd love to hear it.